Hello, my name is Rich Whitworth, Content Director of The Ophthalmologist. Welcome to this interview series ahead of this year's ESCRS in partnership with Teleon Surgical. I'm joined today by Professor Rudy Nuijts. Thank you so much for joining us today. Perhaps we can begin with a short introduction of yourself, your research, and the research of your wider team.
So my name is Rudy Nuijts. I'm a professor in corneal transplantation and refractive surgery in Maastricht, in the Maastricht University Medical Center, the University Eye Clinic there. That's a smaller city in the south of the Netherlands. I've been working there for almost 30 years now. And my research really relates to new innovations in corneal transplantation surgery. So we've done a lot of research in corneal lamellar transplant surgery, actually performing numerous randomized clinical trials comparing ultra-thin DSEK versus regular DSEK and ultra-thin DSEK versus DMEK, for instance. And then we have been also very active in the rest of the anterior segments, looking at the long-term effects of phakic intraocular lenses, especially in iris-fixated intraocular lenses. And then we are active in the field of cataract surgery. And cataract surgery, over the years, we have looked to numerous new innovations, toric IOLs, multifocal IOLs. And lately, actually, we have published a randomized clinical trial of immediate bilateral cataract surgery versus delayed sequential bilateral surgery. And that was published almost 3 weeks ago in The Lancet, and actually gained a lot of attention here in the media also.
Well, a paper in The Lancet certainly sounds like one career highlight, but can you walk us through some of your other professional highlights over the course of your career?
Yeah, as you say, indeed, a paper in the Lancet is very special for an ophthalmologist. That doesn't happen every day. Me and my team are very proud about that. Basically, what we looked after in 10 centers in the Netherlands is we looked at the outcomes in terms of vision and refraction and in ISBCS versus DSBCS. It was a non-inferiority trial in about 865 patients. And what we basically found out is that there is no difference in the percent eyes that are within 1 diopter in both groups. The average visual acuity is the same also in both groups. So in this selective population, because these were eyes, who had no ocular comorbidity, who didn't have previous surgery. So in these eyes, I think the newer generation formulas are so predictable, so good, that the anxiety that is out there for refractive surprise, if you do ISBCS, is not really warranted, we believe. Okay. Of course, this study was not powered for complications like endophthalmitis and things like that, because we need hundreds and thousands of eyes to do that nowadays. And I don't think randomized clinical trial will be designed to do that in the future. But we know from our Cochrane review that has been performed by a colleague of mine, Dr. Dickman and Lindsay Speckreiser, who is a PhD on this study. We know from that review that was published last year, actually, that there is no real evidence in the literature that ISBCS has a higher risk for complications. Mm-hmm. So it's safe on the one side with data from the literature. It's effective, what we have seen in our clinical randomized trial. But what we also have done is a very large health economic analysis, actually. And it turned out that if you would calculate the number of eyes in the Netherlands that would be amenable to ISBCS, given the advantage that you can book money-wise in the difference in daycare fees, in the difference in having less home care involved with ISBCS versus DSBCS, also less patient visits. For the Netherlands, there would be a maximum saving achievable of around 27 million euros per year. Now, 3/4 of that being realized by the difference in daycare fee, so only 1 versus 2, but 1/4 actually by having less home care, less patient visits, et cetera, et cetera. And this, of course, is important because if you have less patient visits, you have more capacity, you can have less waiting lists. And if you have less home care, I mean, for the patients, it's really much more practical. They don't have to go too often to the hospital. They can give the eye drops to both eyes at once. There is a faster visual recovery. There is not a problem of the ametropia between the eyes, etc. So all kinds of patient advantages are out there, and I think that raised a lot of publicity and attention also from the media. So it was in the 8 o'clock news at night, it was in all the newspapers, and it has also because there is less travel involved, also taken some advantages in the sustainability issue, of course, because if you have less patient visits afterwards, you have less travel, less CO2 emission. And the CO2 emission can be reduced by 25%, actually. That's what we calculated by doing that. So this was really, I think, a highlight of my research career.
Let's turn our attention now to refractive cataract surgery in particular. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen over the last decade or so?
Well, I still think if you look back, and we were, I think, one of the first in Europe to implant a toric IOL, that a toric IOL, in my view, was one of the biggest innovations, actually. Why? I think because it's an innovation that has been implemented well in the market. And why is that? That's because it doesn't raise the, let's say, the concerns and anxiety that some colleagues have with the other technology, being presbyopia correcting IOL. There's not much to lose when you're going to implant a toric IOL. The only thing that could go wrong is when the lens is not placed in an appropriate position, or when it's going to turn or rotate after implantation, which is, I must say, in our experience, is very seldom. So we have, a realignment rate of around 2% actually in our population, and then even of those 2%, 50% of the patient doesn't want to do anything. So the risks for having a secondary intervention after an implantation of a toric IOL is very low. And it gives the patient, of course, quite some beneficial effects. In our hands, and we published that in a trial also years ago by Nienke Visser, my colleague, 80% of our patients, and that was a first generation, calculator use. 80% of the patients actually don't use glasses for distance anymore, and have an uncorrected vision which is 0.8 or higher. So there is a lot to gain from a toric IOL. Second, of course, are the introduction of the multifocal IOLs, and also with this one, we were one of the first to use the Restore, a classic, diffractive IOL in the past with a higher addition, and then followed by, more recently the EDOF lenses. And what we see now from the EDOF lenses is that what is attractive also for the patient, I think, is that the incidence of side effects has decreased tremendously. So halos, glare, with the newer generation EDOFs has really decreased to a level that it becomes almost comparable to implantation of a monofocal IOL.
That brings us nicely on to the next question, which is your opinion on the difference in performance between the current crop of enhanced monofocal IOLs versus true EDOF IOLs, and indeed how you would suggest differentiating those segments for improved patient outcomes.
It's a little bit of a personal taste also, I would say. I have not a lot of experience with enhanced monofocal, so we don't use enhanced monofocal as our, let's say, standard IOL, like some other colleagues do here in the Netherlands or in other countries. I know from the experiments and from what I hear that an enhanced monofocal can give you a little bit of extra, intermediate vision. But if you look into the literature and to comparative studies, there is not a whole lot of real well-designed randomized clinical trials comparing, enhanced monofocal versus the newer generation EDOF lenses. If you look at the results that are out there, it appears that they are a little bit different, with EDOF being a little bit better than an enhanced monofocal lens for the intermediate. But the biggest difference actually comes at near vision. So although with an EDOF lens, near vision probably not, in terms of spectacle independency as high as with a classical diffractive IOL or another technology. But it can be around 60%, spectacle independency for near, if you do a little bit of mini monovision, etc. And that figure is really different in comparison to an enhanced monofocal. So an enhanced monofocal, to read that that's an expectation that we cannot promise to a patient. There's really a difference. But in the intermediate, I would say, arena, there these two lenses are not so far different from each other. That's actually my experience, and also from what I see in the literature and what I hear from colleagues.
Once again, you've brought us nicely onto our final question, actually. We've talked a little bit about the history of refractive surgery. How about we look forward to the future and the advances you would like to see in the next wave of EDOF IOLs?
Yeah, what we would like to see, of course, is that we manage to have the outcomes, let's say, closer to ametropia and with less residual astigmatism. We still have unexpected surprises in surgical-induced astigmatism in some cases. We know that there is now technology out there who can, change the curvature of lenses, like light adjustable lenses, etc. It appears that although we have quite good results, we're plus or minus a half day up to now in, let's say, 80 to 85% of cases, that there is still, possibility to gain another 10% extra if you use this new technology. Now, the question, of course, is how this transfers to better patient outcomes, better patient satisfaction, and better performance with these lenses. I think we don't know that exactly. We know that we can make it a little bit, better in terms of predictability, but how it transfers to, let's say, the ultimate outcome, which is patient outcome, we don't know. The holy grail, accommodative IOLs that people are always talking about, I must say, over the years, I've seen many of those lenses come by with great, expectations of many people, many stakeholders in the field. And we have not seen a single one actually performing quite well in real life. So I'm a little bit hesitant that, during the last, let's say, 6 years of my career, we will have an accommodative lens that's going to suit us all up to the expectations that we really would like to see.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Professor Nuijts.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me for this interview.
Thank you all for watching, and hopefully we'll see you at this year's ESCRS.